Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this great discussion we're going to have, I think, entitled "Powering the Future." It's been a weird year for climate, weird week for climate. I think there's a lot of things, obviously, that are challenging geopolitics. If anyone was listening to the UN, the return of climate denial. And then, the real costs that we're feeling of disasters that are related to climate. At the same time, sometimes I'm asked to say something positive, and I say it's really hard in this atmosphere. But by coincidence, there's three folks on this stage, and we were going to have four, but three who, throughout the course of the year, I think have given me doses of optimism. And so I'm excited to dive into this conversation about powering the future, building on Sylvia Earle's comments, seizing this moment in the best way that we can. And so let me just quickly introduce, again, the folks here. We've got Andrew Forrest, who's the chairman of Fortescue, John Kreitz, who is the CEO of RMI, and then Arunabha Ghosh, who is the CEO of this is the one that I have to double check I get it right, CEO of Council on Energy, Environment, and Water, and Special Envoy for South Asia for COP30. So let me just start here with you, Andrew. You're an outspoken voice in the business community about the opportunity with climate. And so despite all of these sort of headwinds, what is the business case where we sit here in September 2025 for continuing on this push for climate?
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I think the killer app isn't what you've all been hearing of for the 21st century, which is AI. I think what's going to influence your lives, even if you've got an administration here which wants to back the oldest, most feeble horse in the race, fossil fuel, the killer app of the 21st century is just simply solar and a battery. That is going to drop the price of energy all over the world. It is doing it now. Fortescue's harnessing technology on a mammoth scale to send the steel industries green wherever we can, to send countries and continents who are brave enough to come with us to give their people lower 24/7 baseload energy power costs. We apologise to the administration that it's green, but we don't apologise for the fact that we're going to take you down, fossil fuel industry, on raw economics. This is coming, and the people will be the winners.
Well said. So John, you can pick up on that, but I would love to ask you specifically. I mean, one thing that I think you're so well spoken on is the grid, and the challenges with the grid in the U.S. is we have rising electricity demand, and a lot of folks are trying to do a fairly large fossil build-out, gas build-out, to try to provide new generation. And you talk very well about the opportunities for innovation for the grid, other alternatives. So I would love for you to touch on that. You can build off of Andrew's point as well.
Yeah, certainly. The grid is the factory. That's the machine. It's the engine of competitiveness and of frankly of wealth here going forward. When we think about what we need for industry and a planet. And as Andrew said, we have new tools today, like battery and storage, that allow us to manage the grid differently and redesign it. But we also have a lot more that we can do. And especially here in the United States, we've invested quite literally trillions of dollars in a grid that today runs at about 40% utilization, right? So this massive capital-intensive asset that we have is barely used relative to what its potential is. And that's because in the 1950s, we didn't have a way to actually run it differently. But now we do. We have ways to use energy efficiency and to manage the amount that we need on the grid quite dramatically. We have ways to respond and use load or the different things like our thermostats and our draws on the power differently. We have ways to also automate the grid differently and through new reconductoring technologies that allow us to get more power through the same rights of way on transmission lines, or using AI for smart for a smarter grid, allow us to balance the grid differently, that we should be expecting a lot more from our grid. And right now, the projections are that the costs of electricity in the United States are likely to go up as much as 40% here over the next 5 years. And that's if we do it the dumb way, which is really focusing on supply side. Before we ever think about adding new generation to the grid, we should be making the grid a lot smarter. And in the process, we drive down the cost and we ultimately improve and modernize the grid for a future that is going to be much more heavily electrified. And the U.S. has done this before. In the 70s to 2000, quite literally, we dropped the real cost of energy in the United States for 3 decades straight. And it's only over the last 20 years that we've started to increase those costs with receiving less and less benefit from this massive and important machine that is quite literally the engine of industry here going forward.
And Arunabha, I guess I'd love to get a global perspective on some of these questions here. How are folks that you're engaged with thinking about these questions of the balance of new fossil generation and some of these other technologies that are growing?
Justin, first of all, we have to recognize that the energy transition is going to be really playing out in emerging markets and developing economies. Nearly 90% of all new electricity demand will come from those geographies over the next 2 decades. And yet, before we think, they are just locked into a fossil future, the reality is that in many countries, whether it's in Southeast Asia, take Vietnam, in India, in Sub-Saharan Africa, in Latin America, there are many countries that actually have a higher share of renewables in their electricity mix than you get here. So there is a double leapfrog happening. One, there are about 600 million people or close to 700 million people who still don't have access to electricity. India electrified 130 million people within 18 months. That was 11,000 human beings getting a wire into their homes every hour. Now the world needs to electrify 11,500 human beings every hour right out to 2030 to meet the Sustainable Development Goal. Meanwhile, there is this massive push on clean electrification. So India has now crossed 50% of its installed electricity capacity is now coming from non-fossil. We hope to increase the generation share up to 50%, and that will depend on how we optimize for the grid. So these are these 2 leapfrogs that are happening. But there's one more thing here, which is how do we use the energy transition to drive the economic transformation? And when we look at that, you see small businesses, medium-scale enterprises form the bulk of the industrial base in many developing countries. They can be electrified. They are not making steel. They're making T-shirts, toys, etc. You electrify and send clean electrons through them. And then you look at the heavy industry. India has just come out with the world's first green steel taxonomy. We've got the world's largest green hydrogen mission. So we've got to put all these building blocks in place and leverage both the technology but also the business models and competitive markets to drive prices down and growth up.
So prices, growth, new technological developments, these are key factors. I wonder if you might also comment on energy security, right? So we're in this fractured geopolitical environment. Energy security and having access to energy is a big concern. How are you seeing that play out?
You know, when we think of energy security, we're having this conversation about 50 years after the first oil shock. The entire energy security architecture we have in the world is actually for the fuels of the past. It's oil and gas, etc. They're not off the market yet, but it is about the fuels of the past. What we need is an energy security architecture for the fuels of the future. That could be a solar panel. It could be a wind turbine. It could be a hydrogen electrolyzer. It could be a battery. What does that architecture look like? We've got to make sure that we are using comparative advantage in our respective economies to make not the entirety of a panel, not the entirety of a turbine, but the components in which India has a comparative advantage, the components in which the United States has a comparative advantage, which Australia has a comparative advantage. And then you create interdependent value chains. That way, your green industrial policy becomes that much more sustainable, secure, interdependent, codependent, and not a free-for-all. And we've got to avoid this free-for-all scenario because that will slow down the transition rather than accelerate it.
John, do you want to come in there? I mean, we had a good chart up from RMI on some of the clean manufacturing of these technologies, but I would just love to hear your thoughts. You know, which of these technologies are you most excited about?
Yeah, I mean, it's very clear that when it comes to the electrification technologies, solar, storage, continue to drive down in costs at tremendous levels. You know, we're seeing 15 to 20% reductions per year. They are going to be the core of the next energy economy. But we need green molecules too, because there are places where we're going to need to move around. We're going to need energy as we move around. We're also going to need to power intense heat, especially in heavy industry. And so bringing hydrogen in particular to a level of economic cost competitiveness is hugely, hugely important for us here going forward. You know, when we think about that, especially the near-term, most cost-effective ways to make hydrogen work is actually through ammonia and through green shipping, which my colleague here next to us is certainly a pioneer in, and I'm sure you can talk about this here in a moment, Andrew, but also for things like fertilizer, which is used globally. And we see the opportunity for us to remake global industry here in a much more sustainable mode in a very short order. And the good news is that we're doing that right now, that we've already got 130 projects globally that are focused on how do we take and convert what was a very carbon-intensive, fossil-intensive global footprint. And keep in mind, about a third of the global emissions come from heavy industry. We have 130 plants, about a $250 billion right now that has been invested today and is helping to build out new green ammonia manufacturing plants, new carbon capture and cement plants, which are just coming online, new chemicals plants that are all going to be critical to this next energy clean industrial economy. And the really interesting thing is that while the US, while China, while the EU are among the leaders right now in investment, we're seeing a whole swath of countries, kind of an industrial sunbelt that is emerging, including Australia, but also including Brazil and including India, including countries like Egypt, Morocco, that are becoming the natural places to take advantage of this new cheap solar that we have to help us industrialize in a way where the products that we build, the products that we use can all be produced in a low carbon way.
Yeah, that's great, and I would love to pull on this thread of I mean, you know, observing this as a journalist, the rest of the world finding ways to get on with it without the U.S. And making constructive things like that sunbelt that you describe. Andrew, do you want to talk about Green Pioneer? I mean, it feels like the obvious time to tee that up.
No, look, I'm really delighted. I'm learning a great deal. I'm excited by everything that India's doing. The fact you've got 40% excess capacity in your grid means that we should be pumping it full of 24/7 baseload power, unapologetic that it's green, it's just going to be cheaper. Sitting out there on Pier 36 in the Flatiron district of this beautiful city is the world's first pollution-free ship. We invented the technology as to how to harness ammonia. If you've ever smelt ammonia in your cleaning products, you probably gather that it's been shipped all over the world forever. But we've taken it and we've learned how to capture it as a flame inside a cylinder. And if you can do that, then you can use it to drive internal combustion engines. And the beauty of ammonia is that because it's hydrogen and nitrogen, and if you take a cubic meter of ammonia, the nitrogen molecules compress the tiny hydrogen molecules just with gravity, so much so that you get more hydrogen, which is the miracle fuel, in a cubic meter of ammonia than you do in a cubic meter of hydrogen. So it's got massive potential. And when I began to read that there was a pushback from North America against one of the best things I've ever seen, which is a big multilateral, huge industry which is in danger of causing all of us as organic life huge grief, which is the global shipping industry. It accounts for 3% of all emissions, growing to 10%. Now, as organic life, we can't afford that. That's going to make a hell of a difference to temperatures, humidity, which we're not equipped to handle as humans, which is killing people as I speak. So when we learnt that, then when we learned America was basically pushing back hard on the International Maritime Organization, setting itself up to start going green in 2027, around the corner, and getting almost fully green by 2035, still very close. And we were being threatened with tariffs in Australia, with visa cancellations, economic bullying, if we voted for something which is fundamentally good for humanity. And we're a big shipper, right? I mean, the iron ore industry, the one I'm part of, a big player in, is the heaviest shipper, the biggest shipper on earth by tons. And we're prepared to do it. So where's the problem here, baby? And so here's North America saying, no, this is going to be terrible. And so I thought, well, hell, we're going to sail this ship right into the lion's den called New York in the middle of Unga. And you're welcome. You're welcome to come on board Pier 36.
Yeah, thank you for that. I want to just stick with you one more beat here. Speaking of North America and President Trump's remarks at UNGA, calling climate change a hoax and various other things. In addition to your role as a business leader, you are a PhD marine ecologist, and so I just we heard from Sylvia Earle, but it would be great to hear from you a little bit about the realities of climate change. And then I also just want to prod you a little bit on this question of who's responsible for paying for some of those costs.
Okay, look, the greatest heap of rubbish I've heard for all time is some society leader saying global warming was the greatest con of all time. I mean, I find that gobsmackingly illogical. I just want to invite your president down to our cattle ranches. We have several million acres. Come to my home. You'll see the devastation that global warming is causing. Come and dive. I'm a marine ecologist. Come and dive on the largest reef systems in the world, to the Great Barrier Reef, like I do. Come and dive on the Ningaloo Reef, the largest fringing reefs in the world, 5,000 kilometres the other side of the Australian continent. Come up into the Indian Ocean like I've just done, and dive on those islands and see the devastation of those reefs. They were once the most beautiful ecosystems on Earth, and they're now covered in moth. They are destroyed. This is the first of the great tipping points, ladies and gentlemen, which scientists have been talking about forever. And, that's just Australia. In the Pacific, I've been searching for my uncle's remains for many years now, at least 5 years. He was shot down by the Japanese, died with American forces in World War II. His body has not been recovered. My family still has this open wound. And so I've been going up to these remote islands, searching for his aircraft and his remains. And I've made friends with all the villagers, all the chiefs, etc., as you can imagine. And even in 5 years, I've watched them having to move their villages back further and further and further as the tides and storms come up higher and higher and take out their houses, take out their homes, take out their schools. And I'm thinking, you're causing real damage, President Trump. This misleading of the American public and anyone else who's going to think, well, you're the US president, we should believe you. You're causing real damage to the lives of very real families and communities all over the world. And I'm just saying, this is not good, Mr. President. You've got to tell the truth. Global warming is absolutely real.
Thank you. I want to shift gears. We were supposed to have Damiola Ogunbibi here, and unfortunately, due to our late start, she had to run to another engagement. But of course, she runs SE for All and does great work, with developing countries, emerging market countries on the energy transition and energy access issues. But I want to go to you two both. You both have global perspectives, and just to maybe reflect on the opportunities in this moment for work to happen, outside of the U.S., outside of some of the traditional sort of places that have led, quote unquote, the sort of center of the climate conversation. What are those opportunities going forward? And we can start with you, John. And
Yeah, the thing I would say that we all should take in mind here is that 80% of the world is still very much moving on the fast track toward clean energy because it makes economic sense, because it makes sense from a resiliency perspective, because it makes sense from an employment and a job perspective, and ultimately it makes sense from an equity and an inclusion perspective. And, when RMI works in over 50 countries around the world, we work in sub-Saharan Africa, and the power that you give to a community by providing a local microgrid, right, that has solar and storage, that enables the growth and the industrial, kind of just the local productivity of having a rice mill that's able to take some of the human drudgery out of the local economy, or that allows you to start powering your own electric two-wheeler or three-wheeler on your farm that enables you to actually get around and spend more time doing useful things rather than walking from place to place, allows you to take people to medical support. These are things that we can afford much more cheaply now, and that communities around the world are starting to benefit from at scale. And there's no question about the benefit and the scale of not just the opportunity, but the real momentum that's happening outside, in economies led by, I think, India in a very powerful way to help support what can be a much more equitable approach to growth, to development, and ultimately to harmonizing a bit of our economies with their needs relative to the available and plentiful things like the natural sunshine that we all experience every day.
Justin, let me answer your question by giving the stories of three women. One is a lady called Raj Kaur. She's in Amritsar in Punjab, in northern India. She drives a pink tuk-tuk. That pink tuk-tuk is one of 1,200 tuk-tuks that have converted to electric tuk-tuks in that one city alone. But what's actually happening, I would hazard a guess that no one here knows that India sold 1.9 million EVs last year. Not a single one of them was a Tesla. Not yet. But 93% of those were two-wheelers and three-wheeler tuk-tuks. Most of the remainder were buses. This is our version of an sustainable transport revolution. Second lady, Kuhi Deruri, she's from our eastern state of Odisha. Often that state gets buffeted by climate extremes. She's a silk reeler. Silk is reeled on women's thighs. They sit on the floor and reel it. It's a task of drudgery. She has become a solar silk reeler. And she's trained 500 other women silk reelers to do this. The Prime Minister referred to her in his radio broadcast. It's from a company that we've been supporting as CEW, a portfolio of startups using clean energy for rural livelihoods. Guess what's the scale of that market in India? $50 billion opportunity for using clean energy for rural livelihoods. Last story, Usha Rani, a natural farming practitioner in the state of Andhra Pradesh, an arid, semi-arid area in the southeast of India. In a half-acre plot of land, she was growing 15 crops when I visited her a few years ago. Natural farming eliminates fertilizers, uses the soil nutrients, and you're able to have a much more climate-resilient output. India, that state has the largest program on natural farming in the world. Over 1.5 million farmers are now doing this. What I'm trying to say here is that if there's one message you want to take away from this dinner, if there's one hoax, if there's one con, it's that we in the global south are not acting on climate change because the United States told us to act on climate change. We're acting on climate change because it makes sense for us, because we are vulnerable, but we also have the agency to combat this crisis, and we're doing it when you're doing it at scale. Start telling our stories, and you'll have a much nicer dinner.
Thank you. That is a great note to end on. I have to say, I mean, telling the stories around the world of things that are still happening, that are affecting real people in positive ways is so important. So I thank you for that. John, I think you laid out the picture with technology perfectly. It's great to hear that. And Andrew, I appreciate, I mean, it's sad to say, but it's important that in 2025, folks in the business community are still comfortable with saying climate change is real and we need to act on it, and this is the business case. So thank you to all of you for taking the time. That was very appreciated. Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, Justin.